Hi, this is Dr. Martin's supplemental lecture on leaf structure. I have a diagram here on the board we're going to go through to talk about structure and function along the way. I'll label things as we go along. We're going to let the direction of sun be here, so this is going to be the upper surface of the leaf, and I'm going to first talk about the leaves that we're more familiar with, and those are deciduous leaves, very flat blades, a lot of surface area. So the upper layer, the very first structure we would come across is a waxy substance that's there to reduce water loss. This is called the cuticle. Below that is a single layer of cells that represent the epidermis, and it is there for protection. So because this is the upper surface of the leaf, we sometimes call this the upper epidermis. The upper surface of the leaf will occasionally be interrupted by a pore or opening that's called a stomata. We're actually going to talk more about that down here, so I'm going to skip that structure until we come down here. The main part of the leaf is composed of a layer called the mesophyll, and this is the leaf. This is the tissue or the cells that have the most chloroplast and are primarily responsible for photosynthesis in the leaf. The upper layer of mesophyll is composed of columnar cells that are stacked side by side, and so this is sometimes called the palisade layer because they're stacked that way. Below that is a layer of mesophyll that is not as tightly stacked. There's a lot of air spaces in this lower layer, and because of that, this layer is called the spongy mesophyll. In here we have a cross-section of a vein, which is common in the leaves that we're talking about. So we're going to look at what's inside that vein. And the upper layer of cells that are very large here is composed of xylem. So those are the cells that transport water and dissolved minerals. And those large cells are probably vessel elements. Beneath that is a group of cells that make up the phloem, which, remember, is a set of tubes that transmits sugars dissolved in a fluid, in water. And the cells in there are the sieve tube members and their companion cells. Okay, below the spongy mesophyll is what's called the lower epidermis. And the lower epidermis is going to be broken up into little areas where you will see pores or openings in the epidermis, and those openings are called stomata. So here's an opening here. The opening can be closed or open, and it is controlled by a group of cells. There's two cells on either side of that opening, and those cells are called guard cells for obvious reasons. And when they swell up, then that changes position of, or the opening and closing of the pore, and when they lose water, it goes back to a different position. Also below the epidermis is another layer of that waxy material called the cuticle. Now, one of the things to remember about the structure is that structure always follows function, or function follows structure. They go together. So the reason that we have a lot of air spaces in the lower part of the leaf is to accommodate the gases for photosynthesis. So remember that we're going to have CO2 molecules that are necessary for photosynthesis. So they're going to be able to diffuse through the stomata into the spongy area of the mesophyll. Remember also that we're going to have a gas released, oxygen, and in addition, we have the problem of losing water whenever the stomata are open. And that's a problem that has been solved in various ways by different plants. One solution here is to put the stomata on the lower level of the leaf where it's cooler, and therefore you wouldn't have quite as much water loss. Okay. One more thing I want to point out, and that is the overall shape of a leaf is determined by the location on the entire earth of that plant. So we're looking here at a leaf that we would call a deciduous leaf, very flat, thin blade. But there are other kinds of leaves, and for us, the most common are those that belong to conifers, and so we sometimes call them needles because they are very, very thin. They're not structured anywhere near the type of blade. The reason that these are very thin, we're going to see these primarily in cold climates where there are long winters. Water is scarce because it's usually in a frozen state. And therefore, we have a problem with water loss. So these plants can't really afford to have a big broad leaf like that with the veins through it because that would lose too much water. So instead we have a rather compact leaf, and there's lots and lots of those. So we compensate in part by having more of these needle-shaped structures. But primarily the shape is due to the fact that we have to minimize water loss. Let me write that again. I'll put an asterisk. Minimize water loss. This also explains why the broad deciduous leaves that I've talked about, why they tend to drop in the fall. And that is because there's a lack of water during the winter. These things lose a lot of water, and it's better for the plant to simply drop them rather than maintain them in an upright position where we have a lot of water going out into the atmosphere. Okay, that's the end of supplemental lecture number 1.